Good day. It's the 25th of June, 2021. Getting a lot of questions about the physical exams, the entry-level physical exam to work in law enforcement. Now, this is usually the last thing that you had to go through. At least when I was hired, it was the last thing that I had to do, was go to the doctor and get a physical exam. And they sent me to a contract physician in Chicago. And, for me, it was no problem at all. The only thing they found is that I had high triglycerides. And I was 25 years old. I had no idea what that is, but I've had them all my life. And, and nobody that I knew, well, obviously we all were hired, so nobody that I knew, had failed the exam. But, the questions that I've been receiving are good. So what I'm going to do is put out some generalized information on your entry-level physical. And, you're probably not aware of this, or you might be. If you are under age 40, every 3 years you'll take a physical. Once you're 40, it's every 2 years. Once you're 50, it's every year. But those standards, once you're hired, the retention standards differ from the recruitment standards. So let's take a look at this right now, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit more after my little presentation. Okay, and as I said, there's differences between the recruitment and retention standards. You may meet the standards to stay in the agency once you're hired, but you may not meet the recruitment standards. But one thing you're going to find that's odd is that the requirements tend to differ from one agency to another in certain areas. Now, when you look at, again, it tends to be the last step of the hiring process. I think it should be done, probably before they give you your PT test in case you drop dead, but that's just me. That would be a liability type of thing, but whatever. Now, again, standards can differ widely between agencies, particularly vision requirements. Now, let's give you an example. This includes state and local as well as federal. The California Highway Patrol, for instance, in 1982, allowed uncorrected vision of 20/40 correctable to 20/20. 20/40, if you don't know, is pretty good vision. Okay, you can get in the military with 20/40 even if it doesn't correct. Okay, but it had to be correctable. Now, DEA, it's 2200 to 20/20. Now, what's the reason for the discrepancy? Is it that you have to have really great vision to be a state trooper? And the answer is no. I mean, if you go to the next state over, they have a different standard. So every agency has their own little policy and their own little opinion on these things. And you could be perfectly qualified for one agency and not for another. It happened to me, okay? But the purpose of the federal exam, at least, is to determine if you're able to perform the requirements set forth by the Office of Personnel Management for the job. And the first thing we'll look at is height and weight. And one thing you will notice is if you look at any of the training videos, you don't see any obese trainees. I would consult the military height and weight recruitment tables. It's available online. You can get it on a military recruitment site. Go to the MEPS website. And, I would make sure that I meet those standards. Okay, if you're overweight according to military standards, they're going to be very, very careful as to whether they hire you, even if you can pass the test. Again, look at these training videos I've done and count how many trainees are obese. And you're going to see that, there aren't any, really. They're in the best shape of their lives. And they didn't just get in that shape when they went to the academy. When they were hired, they were in good shape. So if you're overweight, I don't think you're going to have a very good possibility of getting hired. Maybe even if you can pass the physical. But again, the PT test is going to, weed out a lot of people who are just out of shape to begin with. Vision and hearing, this is the medical factor that's likely to disqualify an applicant for, obvious, no pun intended reasons, okay? And again, if you can't see well, if you don't have 20/20 vision, that's a problem, okay? Because if you get on the witness stand and your vision is impaired or not correctable, they have to disclose that to the defense because you're testifying about what you saw. And maybe you didn't see what you saw, what you say you saw, or maybe you thought you saw something you didn't see. Same thing applies to color vision. That really is something that isn't waivable. If they want to know what color the guy's clothing was, I'm colorblind. All I can see is, certain shades. That's going to be a problem. and it's unfortunate, but it's going to probably disqualify you. Same thing for hearing. Your hearing has to be just about perfect. Now, with my hearing, they made me go to Easter seals. I have no idea why, but I didn't pass whatever it was, so I had to go to another place and get my hearing tested, and then they were good with it. And that was to get hired. Now, once you're on, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but that's it. And then the third thing that would knock most people out, or many people out, is psychological conditions. And again, any condition that could adversely affect the performance of your duties, it has to be evaluated carefully by the agency physician. So here's my advice. If you are overweight, go to the website, the military website, the Army recruiting, Navy recruiting, Marine recruiting, and if you couldn't join the military right now because you're too fat, take care of it now. Okay, if you got to lose 20 pounds, 30 pounds, do it. You can do it in a couple months. Okay, it's not that hard to do. This is one area in which you have complete control. And secondly, I would say if you cannot easily pass your agency's PT test, don't apply until you're in shape. Because what you don't want to do is take the test and fail it. Then that's going to, put your application to the bottom of the file. Or if you can just barely pass it, that's not passing it really. Because they're afraid if they send you to the academy, the protocol is tough and they'll fail you and send you home. And they don't want that to happen. So again, this is an area that you're under it's under your complete control unless you have some sort of unusual situation. Okay, the vision and hearing, either you meet the requirements or you don't. Color blindness, poor vision or depth perception, need of a hearing aid will DQ you. And again, you can pass one agency's requirements and fail another. It's happened to me. Okay, psychological conditions. LE is very stressful, and you'll have to take a psychological eval before you're hired by most agencies. And that will result in, it'll consist of several surveys and a 20 to 30 minute talk with a psychologist. Now, if you have a history of mental illness or do not function well under stress, and that could include a history of serious depression or anxiety disorders, this may adversely affect you. I think it might affect you. And the reason being is whatever conditions you tend to have when you go into law enforcement, they tend to get worse. Okay? So if you are prone to depression, if you're prone to severe anxiety issues, if you have panic attacks, it's not going to get better by going into law enforcement. It's going to probably get worse, and they know that. Okay? Now, any history of alcohol or drug abuse, of course, drug abuse for sure, but alcohol, it'll have to be carefully screened. And, we had a retired ASAC, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he died in the St. Louis jail a couple months ago while he was detoxing for alcoholism. And he had retired from DEA, and he was arrested because he violated a no contact order with his wife, and they threw him in a St. Louis jail, whatever county that is. He died in there. He was a retired GS-15 because he was detoxing from alcohol abuse. So if you have this problem going in, it's not going to be any better, and a lot of people acquire it once they're in, and they're very sensitive to that. Now, what if you need to take medication to control a medical condition? And that's a judgment call on the part of the physician. For instance, if you have to take medication to control allergies or asthma, okay, well, they are going to spray you with pepper spray, and in some agencies, you're going to have to go through the gas chamber, okay, which means you're going to go into the CS chamber. The Secret Service will make you do this. The Park Police will make... DEA, they don't make you do that. FBI, they don't make you do that unless you're going into HRT. But, I think, so for those agencies, so long as you can control your asthma with a inhaler and you can pass the PT, you're good, Same thing with blood pressure, so long as it's controllable, Now, these standards differ in that regard from the armed forces, which in my experience don't allow anyone to enlist who's taking medication. Now, I have severe allergies. I remember when I went to enlist in the Marines, and they said, you don't want to put that down. Now, this was 1976, so, I'm just going to confess. I fraudulently enlisted, okay? They said, don't put it down. I'm not supposed to. No, don't put it down. They're just going to disqualify you. They said, do you need to take medicine for it? I take it, but they said, well, what happens if you don't take it? I don't know, I'll probably have a runny nose. I said, well, I have that too. Just put down no and tell the doctor no, and you'll pass. Now, was that good advice? Well, I got in, and I probably wouldn't have gotten in otherwise. Maybe that wasn't good advice, but and they probably wouldn't do it today. But back then, once you got to receiving barracks, you saw all kinds of people who had bizarre conditions, and you had no idea how they got in. I mean, some of them were flat out. I have to say, they were mentally. They probably had an IQ of 70 or 60, and they had to put them in a special platoon and then separate them. Those were the old days, okay? But now what they want to do is they want to make sure you're worldwide deployable. So that's why there is the difference between the military and law enforcement. If you have a problem, something that the doctor can't decide, they'll send you to a specialist, okay? So if you have psychological issues, let's say you've had a history of depression, let's say you've had a history of panic attacks, okay, they're going to probably send you to a psychiatrist with a list of questions, okay? And they have to answer those questions, and there you go. Now, one of the strangest things I've seen on a DEA entry physical, book was written by a man named Philip Fair, and but he worked for the NSA, and he was in Iraq, in Abu Ghraib as a contractor. But he applied to DEA, and he failed the physical. They told him his heart had a serious problem. And they sent him to a specialist, and they diagnosed him with a leaky heart valve. And eventually he had to get a heart transplant. But he didn't know that. He passed the physical, the PT test, but when he got to the physical exam, a leaky heart valve. So there you go. Retention and recruitment standards differ. One thing you'll notice when you report, there's plenty of heavy agents and officers. I've seen agents with poor hearing. My right ear is shot from shooting, no pun intended. So my hearing is defective on the right side, but I don't need a hearing aid. I've seen agents with epilepsy, heart conditions, and yes, Special Agent Persante, who was blinded in Afghanistan, was allowed to stay on and retire. So there you have it. I wish I could answer all of your questions, but I can't. Just give you generalities, but be truthful on your medical forms, because it's both immoral and illegal to lie to the U.S. government. And I wish you the best of luck on your physical exam and in all aspects of your application. And thank you so much for the kind comments. And also thank you very much for, again, wanting to serve in law enforcement at this anti-law enforcement period of our career, or our history, I should say. I've never seen anything like it, but thank you for either serving in state and local or wanting to serve in, law enforcement if you're outside of it right now. And I hope you got something out of this, and thank you for watching.